In this presentation, I'm going to talk about classical conditioning. This is one of the most famous and well-known principles in psychology. Now, all of you have probably heard about Pavlov's dogs. He did a classic experiment in which he trained dogs to salivate in response to a bell. So here's how it worked. You present food to a dog and the dog salivates. That's an inborn response. So the food is the unconditioned stimulus and the salivation is the unconditioned response. Now, if you ring a bell for a dog, you don't get salivation because the ringing bell, there's nothing innately programmed into a dog to respond to a bell. So the bell is a neutral stimulus and there's no salivation and no conditioned response to the bell. So now you begin the conditioning by pairing the bell with the food. Every time the bell rings, the dog gets food. Every time he gets food, he hears a bell ring. So salivation is initially the unconditioned response to the food. After conditioning, the bell becomes a conditioned stimulus and the dog salivates in response to the bell. That's a conditioned response. Now, this principle is involved in a number of types of psychopathology. Phobias can be explained by classical conditioning. At some point, a neutral stimulus becomes paired with an unconditioned stimulus. And that pairing results in you fearing something that was previously neutral. Paraphilias and sexual fetishes can also be explained by classical conditioning. If you are exposed to a neutral stimulus when you're in a state of sexual arousal, then soon that neutral stimulus takes on sexual properties and you respond to that previously neutral stimulus. It becomes conditioned. Now, how do you get rid of a conditioned response? Well, it's called extinction. If you repeatedly present the conditioned stimulus without the pairing, eventually it wears out. Eventually the conditioned response fades and the conditioned stimulus once again becomes a neutral stimulus. Now, a classic intervention for instance, phobias is systematic desensitization. By continually exposing the person, either in imagination or in reality, to graded exposures to the feared stimulus, you can eventually fade the fear. So for instance, if someone has a snake phobia, you can start out by showing them sketches of a snake, pictures of a snake, and eventually have them in the same room with an actual snake, get closer and closer to it, and as you increase that exposure, just barely below their level of tolerance, eventually their fear of snakes will fade.